I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange.
Hey there, spooky nerds, and welcome to Talking Strange, the paranormal pop culture show. I'm Aaron Sagers, and also want to give a shout out to all of our folks in the Patreon live stream audience that watching, listening, and participating as we record. So if you want to get on that, hey, head over to patreon.com/Aaron Sagers to join in another live stream. So I'm excited for this chat today because Chad Lewis, I have to say, Chad, before I bring him in, this is someone that I've known for a while as far as a researcher. I know his books, but even though we've moved in the same circles for so long, we haven't really got to hang out a whole lot together. Have not gotten to know one another a whole lot, but just such a solid, solid researcher and author uh, and a lecturer who has talked on all manner of topics of the strange, the unusual. If you make your way out to a paranormal conference, I'm guessing you will have seen him and you need to check out his talks. Uh, he covers a lot of ground. Interestingly, he's written, I think, uh, 30 books. How many books you got out there, Chad? Now I'm breaking the wall, but how many books?
I had to think about that the other day. 38.
38. And background is in the field of psychology and also did his bachelor's master's degree work in that field and really traveled the globe, covered a lot of ground looking for unique, bizarre stories and history. And today, it's cold outside. It's been a brutal winter. And I don't know, I think of this creature not only as being a winter creature, but it does remind me of winter. And we're going to talk about Chad's book of Wendigo Lore, Monsters, Myths, and Madness, which he also wrote with Kevin Lee Nelson. It is available now. You can head over to his website to pick it up. And let's dig into some Wendigo lore. Chad, thanks for joining me, man.
First of all, greetings from the back roads of Wisconsin. It's great to be here on this winter, cold, chilly night. And knock on wood, hopefully we both survive and the Wendigo doesn't come after us.
I hope not. I mean, if the Wendigo shows up in New York City, I mean, upstate New York, I expect. New York City, well, it's branching out. I would say I would feel bad for the Wendigo considering the cost of living down here and how cold it's been down here. I think it's colder than in Antarctica in parts of the city, so or has been. So, Wendigo, don't come here. uh, so before we get into the meat of the book, I just want to get a little bit of your origin story. I know you probably talked about it a lot, but were you a monster kid?
Not really. I grew up as interested in the supernatural as most kids are, but nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until my brother had a strange encounter that kind of sparked my interest. And then when I started high school, I joined the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. And then I happened to study psychology at college. And that's when I really got interested in why some people believe in the supernatural and others don't. What is it about human perception and belief systems? And started presenting really boring statistical stuff. Like, you're glad you weren't there at research symposiums through graduate school. And then started lecturing to the general public. And that's when people would come up and say, I need help. I think I saw something in the sky I can't explain, or my home's haunted. Can you give me some assistance? So it really just kind of skyrocketed from there.
Yeah. What were what were you talking about in the more academic side of things? See, I'm fascinated by that, those stats, those figures. What were some of the topics at those symposiums?
I actually did my master's thesis on students' belief in the paranormal. So I was looking at what students believed in and the entire spectrum of the paranormal, everything from ghosts, aliens, chupacabra, out of body experiences, near death experiences, prop circles, you name it. And then I was looking at differences in belief systems where I was looking at gender differences. I couldn't really look at um, education level because I was mainly dealing with students, either undergrad or graduate. So there wasn't a big difference. But so I was looking at gender differences. I was looking at how spiritual or religious, the religiosity of somebody. And I was finding really amazing things. And in terms of like gender, I was finding in my study, statistically speaking, men were much more likely to believe in the possibility of creatures like Bigfoot, aliens, ghosts, Loch Ness monster. I think things that you could go out and hunt and kill, where women were significantly more likely to believe in the possibility of out of body experiences, telepathy, um, internal things that you would think would be internally. So I thought that was interesting. But I think the highlight of my entire study was the idea that when I looked at beliefs in the possibility of something happening, it's obvious to say if you experienced a ghost, you're probably more likely to believe that they exist or the possibility, or if you saw a UFO. But what I found interesting is that people who reported a loved one or a close friend who had an encounter. So if your best friend or your grandmother had an encounter with Bigfoot and you didn't, you were more likely to believe in that possibility because you trusted that loved one or friend or family.
Hmm. The did and I'm sorry for not knowing this, but is that research out there? Like, have you ever published that thesis?
Yes, it's on my website. There's a link to the University of Wisconsin Stout where I did my graduate work, and it's a 200-page thesis with so many stats that if you're looking to fall asleep at night, this will do the trick for you. But yeah, that is available. Um, and it was funny because I'm of an age when this was back a few decades ago where it was still not in the general public. It wasn't well accepted. Where I had a couple professors on campus actively telling their students not to participate in my study because they thought it was quackery, that they were like, this is a P.T. Barnum type study. Don't even get involved. But luckily, the department chair was one of my advisors. So they approved it. But it was back at a time when this was still niche. This was still on the outskirts of what was commonly accepted. So I think I kind of snuck in, and then of course it just today you'd have no problem doing it.
Yeah. And did you notice any, when you're looking at the Venn diagram, and I feel like we probably encounter this even with the paranormal events and the conventions we do now, that some people are like, I believe in ghosts, but not so much this thing over here, etc. But overall, I find there's a little bit more crossover than there even was 20 years ago. But with certain types of monsters and lore, which you have now written many books about, where was that situated in sort of this cross section of belief? Because even if you meet someone that says Bigfoot is possible or is out there, that's still making a leap to chupacabra, to uh, Wendigo, creatures like that. So what were you finding in that?
I limited it to some of the big hitters, if you will, the Mount Rushmore of sea serpents, Bigfoot, vampires, werewolves, and the like. I didn't get into Wendigo or
Yeah.
Chupacabra or Thunderbirds because nobody would have, I mean, the general public, especially back then, wouldn't have known that. So I tried to stick to it, but the belief was pretty high that if you believed in the Loch Ness monster, you were probably more likely to believe in Bigfoot than someone who didn't believe in either. One of the more common sense things I found that the higher you related your religiosity, the higher you thought your religion was important to you, the more likely you were to believe in angels and demons than somebody who wasn't, or maybe more spiritual. So that was pretty common sense, but it was still fascinating to me. Um, So yeah, I did have UFOs and aliens as two separate categories. And as you can imagine, those were pretty highly correlated with one another.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, that is fascinating. I mean, the religiosity component, as you said, like it makes sense for angels and demons, and it makes sense for certain types of hauntings. The When it gets into some of the more fringy type things, I don't know. I'm always fascinated by people that are atheist or agnostic, but then they're coming forward and sharing some of these monster tales. Have you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people that have an experience, and maybe it's because I deal with a lot of the general public. I do a lot of lectures at libraries, historical societies, people that aren't necessarily diehard into it, but they're interested. They're curious. They say, this sounds fascinating. Let's go check it out. So I'm dealing with a lot of people who may not even believe in these things, and they'll often come up a little shy and say, now, I don't believe in ghosts, but this is what I experienced. I can't explain it. I'm sure you get that a lot too, of people saying, I don't believe that UFOs and aliens, but I saw some strange lights I can't identify. So I get that quite a bit. And 30 years ago, it was people would come up after the program and just kind of look around, make sure no one was listening in, and they did almost whisper their story to you. Where now, as you know, you do a lecture and 30 hands go up with people who have stories that are willing to share them out in the open today. So that's been a huge change.
And like the education level is for better and sometimes for worse, or the awareness of these things has expanded so greatly that there was a time where, you know, it was, you, me, a couple of your weirdo friends that had a fascination in this stuff and a literacy to it. And now I don't know, almost mainstream. It definitely seems far more widespread talking about even beyond ghosts, UFOs or Sasquatch, getting into, and I think we're going to get into this as well, but skinwalkers and then Wendigo and things like that, that is, being spoken about in a very casual sense.
You wouldn't believe that when I do a general public program and ones that are age appropriate for all kids and above, that when their parents come up with 8, 10, 12-year-old kids, they ask about two things all the time: skinwalkers and Wendigo. The kids do. And I'm just amazed. And they grab the book and they want to get it. And I have to tell the parent it's probably not the best selection for them, not just because of the material, but also the writing. We did it a little more scholarly than some of our other books. So it probably would be very boring for them. But I'm just, I'm looking at them at 8 years old and I'm thinking, these kids are brave and they're well educated because, at 8, I knew of the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot, and that was about it. I mean, the local library didn't have much more, but these kids know the details, the nuance of the paranormal like nothing I've ever seen.
Yeah, my first kind of awareness of Wendigo was the Marvel Comics, X-Men villain. I'm thinking Wolverine versus Wendigo. What about yours? What was your first kind of thing where you thought, okay, I'm curious about this guy or these guys?
Yeah, my first thing kind of uh collapsed together. That I was in college studying psychology, and we were learning about Wendigo psychosis as like a side little project, the mental disorder, the cultural bound symptoms of it. And at the same time, I was working on a book about Minnesota creatures, mysterious creatures of Minnesota. And I stumbled across a case up in a small town called Ross by the Canadian border, and they had Wendigo sightings in the 1800s. So those two kind of came together. And what I can tell you, I never got to the Marvel character like so many people, but today when people tell me how they heard about the Wendigo, it's almost always either, as you said, the Marvel character, or there's a very popular fiction writer called William Kent Kruger from Minnesota. And he writes a lot of detective novels and the Wendigo plays a part in that series. So if it's younger people, 50 and younger, it's Marvel comic. If it's older readers, it's William Kent Kruger who tell me that's how they got into it. And sometimes it's more pop culture. They saw the episode on Supernatural about it, or one of the specials on one of the TV shows. But most of the time it is the Marvel comic. But I had never seen it growing up. But growing up in Wisconsin and in the Midwest here in the Great Lakes, the Wendigo was something always kind of talked about, but not really brought up as much as you would think of other ghost sightings and local legends. I mean, we had the Hodag and later the Beast of Bray Road and other things to keep us busy.
Don't have time for Wendigo. You got
Right.
enough on your hands.
And
Well,
at that time, sorry, at that time it was more uh, bound to the reservations, to the native areas. It hadn't spread out as much as it has in the last 4 or 5 decades. So back then it was more of a tightly held secret, if you will.
well, and before I get ahead of myself, like let's break down what the Wendigo is based on your research and based on the First Nations legends, because I guess like we got Algonquin, Ojibwe, the Potawatomi. Like, what is sort of the prime Wendigo, also as opposed to what kind of pop culture has turned it into, which is a whole other thing.
This might be the most difficult question I ever have received because my co-author Kevin Lee Nelson and we started this book and stopped it so many times throughout the 2 decades we were working on it because we thought, uh, 6 years in, we thought we don't know anything about this legend. I mean, we studied it. We've traveled all of Canada, all of the Great Lakes of the US where it's been seen and believed in, but we feel like we don't know anything about this legend. It's too vast, it's too big, it's enormous. So we kept postponing it. And eventually we said, we're never going to feel like we know this legend. Let's put it out anyway. But to your question of what it is, it's almost a process where the Wendigo, which is a First Nations Indigenous legend, started in Canada and quickly spread through that country and into ours. And during times of famine, when food was scarce, game was nowhere to be found, during starvation, when you might resort to cannibalism, when you were at your weakest mentally, physically, spiritually, that's when the Wendigo would show up. And it could show up in a physical form, like a bear or a moose, very tall, 8 feet or as big as it wanted to be, thin, skeletal, emaciated. Its heart is encased in ice. Sometimes it consumes its own body when no prey is around to keep alive. But scarier for me is the fact that it can also show up in a spirit form and possess you and slowly start to rot you away, where you turn into a Wendigo and start to see your friends and family not as loved ones, but as game animals, hasty moose or a beaver. So it can show up in several forms, and it is the embodiment of ice. It's the embodiment of cold. It's the elemental monster of the north. It is said to walk in a straight line because nothing can stop it. And the fear of it, its voice is said to be so fearful. When you hear it, you'll freeze in your tracks with fear, which makes it easier for them to come and get you, for them to eat you. But so that's kind of what it is. Um, you can become a Wendigo. You can kill the Wendigo. You can be cured from being a Wendigo. There are many ways you can become a Wendigo. A shaman could send one to your community or tribe. You could start cannibalism, and that will do it. You could be cursed. You could dream of it, because in many cultures, the dream world is just as important as the living. So if you dreamt of the Wendigo, it was likely you might become one. So yeah, I guess it's a long answer to I don't know. I don't know what the Wendigo is. It's perhaps the oldest legend of a monster in North America and maybe the least well known.
Yeah. Talk about some of the variations of the Wendigo amongst some of these tribes that are different enough to make it worth noting those distinctions.
In northern Minnesota, the Wendigo was thought to be a harbinger of death, that it was thought to be much like the Irish Banshee. And that was seemed to be kind of split to that area. I didn't. It was always thought that death is coming with the Wendigo. If you even heard it was in the area, there were people that starved to death rather than go out because they heard the Wendigo was merely near them, and they didn't even want to go out to hunt for game or to collect food. They starved in their lodging. So it was always equated with death, that it was a harbinger of death. It was ill fate coming. But in Minnesota, it meant if you saw it, it meant that the next day somebody was going to die, a loved one, much like, again, hearing or seeing the Irish Banshee. And there are numerous accounts of people writing journals of seeing the Wendigo, and then the next day an elder in the community passed away, and they thought it was directly correlated to or caused by the Wendigo. So that's one. Also in Minnesota, it was often seen with a ball of light accompanying it, whether it was the will o' the wisp that they wrote about a lot or something more supernatural. But they said it had almost a light on its head that would accompany it almost as an early UFO. And that was different. One thing modern Wendigo sightings are that never was in the old literature was the idea of it having antlers or horns. Now, if any of your listeners go out and Google Wendigo right now, you'll probably find it depicted with antlers, looking like an elk face, an elk skull with antlers. And that was never the early literature of the Wendigo. It was more of this hideous ghoul-like creature that, sometimes it would have stringy hair or patches and scruffs of fur, but it was always thin, emaciated. It never had a form of antlers. But in the 1940s, some of the sci-fi writers started putting antlers on some of their art, going along with Algernon Blackwood's Wendigo story. And then it just became that's if people contact me today about a Wendigo sighting, almost all of them report that it had antlers or horns of some sort. And I mean, I guess a legend is going to change in hundreds of years. That the Wendigo of the 1600s Canada is not the Wendigo of 2026 America.
Yeah, and we're essentially we're talking about a correct me if I'm wrong, what seems like a supernatural entity as opposed to what fits within a cryptid category. And the stories are like a lot of legends. They've also there's a moral to it of maybe not taking too much and greed and but also obviously allegories to famine, things like that. And then you mentioned the Algernon Blackwood story. That was in 1908. So that then shapes some of the perception of what the Wendigo is. Uh, that has to provide such a challenge from a research perspective of this very, and you said it took 20 years to write the book, but this kind of amorphous thing that's keep changing. How did you guys ultimately pen down like this is the path we're going to follow or not follow, or yeah, where Wendigo fits under all this?
Good question. We talked about it quite a bit. And the first thing that we agreed on before we even set one page written was that we did not want to try to explain these things away that had already been done, that the Wendigo was a metaphor for the white man's encroachment of the Indigenous people in Canada, or a metaphor of what it was to be a wife in Indigenous cultures, or consumption or greed. That there's so much academic work on the Wendigo focusing on those things that never touch on the supernatural aspects of it. So we said, why waste our time with that? That's been done for decades by scholars. If people want that, they can go get that. Let's take these stories on their face value. Kevin and I kind of explained it that previous generations were white-splaining it, that these things couldn't exist. The legends couldn't be true because it was too bizarre. These people didn't know any better. We know now that that had to be something they were making up for. So we decided, let's take these at face value, that unless we find something to prove that they were making it up or lying or embellishing, that why wouldn't we believe them when they say, when they killed a suspected Wendigo and opened up the carcass, that the person had ice going down its spinal cord the entire length? Why wouldn't we believe that? Because it's too crazy, too bizarre? Well, so that was our first thing. The second thing we really wanted to focus on was treating these legends with respect, because although they will always be indigenous legends, throughout the years, the missionaries came in, the French voyagers, the explorers, the fur trappers, they all started adding their components into the Wendigo. Like there's an early story that the Wendigo could only be killed with silver bullet, which obviously came from Europe with the Europeans bringing that. But it's always an indigenous legend. And the fact that Kevin and I, neither of us are indigenous, two white guys from the Midwest, we thought we have to approach this with the seriousness it deserves and the respect that it deserves. Otherwise, let's not even do it. Let's not even dangle our feet and get mixed up in that. And I think now I receive probably more media requests from indigenous sources than non-indigenous, because so many among the indigenous people have forgotten about it, or they don't want to talk about it. So I find that fascinating as well. And if you have the book, you can see the first first couple pages where we address that and making sure we did it the right way.
Yeah, you do, and it's something I really like. It's something I strive to do as well, that there's this tendency to listen to some of these stories told by indigenous people, natives to a land, and then we think, oh, that's cute. They just didn't know better. And instead, it's like, well, or they probably knew a lot more about what's going on in their surroundings than we know even now with modern technology. But this also, you touched on a question that you're getting in from the Patreon crowd, and this is David and Alicia are asking about Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, and sources for the book, and the hesitancy to speak about these topics. And I think it's a good question, because it's something that, yeah, it's a problem. I mean, trying to even get Indigenous people to talk about, let's say, Sasquatch is a challenge, because look, they've been mistreated so often with their stories, and then turned into like circus acts. So, but yeah, talk about the conversations with native peoples, and you know how you would get anyone to open up to you when you're like, I'm just a white boy from Wisconsin showing up here to chat. Trust me.
One nice thing is when I was in Canada, I passed for Canadian because of the accent and the look. So that
And you're
helped me
so
quite a
polite.
bit. But yes, yes. The Wendigo has a two-prong problem that even Sasquatch or Bigfoot doesn't have, because not only are many indigenous cultures hesitant to share their legends, but then you put on top of that the idea that the merely talking about the Wendigo is enough to put you on its radar, that it will then come looking for you. I was about to give a presentation up in northern Minnesota by Bemidji, by a place called Wendigo Lake. And it was for high school students about mysterious creatures in Minnesota. And before the program, some elders from the local tribe came up and said, we heard you're going to be speaking about a legend in the area. They didn't say what. They said, we'd appreciate it if you would not mention it at all. Don't talk about it. Don't allude to it. And I said, of course, I'm a guest. Don't worry. It won't be anywhere in my program. And those words had no sooner left my mouth than I could see their body language just relax, calm down. They were terrified that I was going to mention it. But what I found is that cold calling stuff, emailing or calling people just to get them to share with you, had terrible luck. But traveling to places, being there physically, showing up at a visitor center or a tribal council meeting, that in person, people were much more likely to share with you. They could maybe read you, pick up on you. And when we were up in the north of Alberta, Canada, right before COVID hit, Kevin Nelson and I were there interviewing people way up in the wilds, and they'd say, "Where are you from?" And we'd say, "Wisconsin." They said, "You came all the way here for this story?" And that really opened them up as well, that they could see we were sincere, we were serious. That helped. So my advice when dealing with any culture around the world is, if you have the opportunity, do it in person. You'll get much further than, emailing somebody saying, "Tell me everything you know about this legend," that you're already hesitant to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of think like on some level as we've already mentioned, kids even will come up and mention Wendigo and then Skinwalker, but Wendigo shares sort of a similar problem with the Skinwalker insofar as yes, it's this um this story that's coming out of the American Southwest. It's a Navajo story, but they don't want to talk about it because by talking about it, you're inviting it forward essentially. But then in the absence of them talking about it, other people come along and then they just scoop whatever they want on top of that legend and make it their own and then start casually throwing around Skinwalker this, Skinwalker that, all around the place. So then it's hard to get the wrap your arms around it.
I'm just doing this for a while. As you know, you get better at interviewing people and just talking with people, letting their guard down. But some people are just naturally great at it. Like the late Linda Godfrey, my colleague. My God, every time I went with her, people just shared everything. My colleague David Weatherly's the same
Yeah.
way. I'll travel with him and I'll ask somebody, we'll go into a bar to get local legends. I'll ask someone, they'll turn away, like, "Who's this nut?" And David's collected 4 stories from people. So it's, sometimes it's just that feeling people get that they can trust you or they like you for whatever reason. So again, I think in person, although it's super hard for a lot of these, is just so much better results for me.
What through the course of working on the book, what would you say is an account that especially unnerved you, got under your skin, kind of living rent free in your head with regards to the Wendigo?
Well, that's easiest question you'll pose tonight. Swift Runner. And I'll get to his story, but I've done books on the most gruesome hauntings of the Midwest, where I go to serial killers' places, mob hits, untimely deaths, suicides, murders, all the like. I've done that for years, and it'll affect you, but nothing prepared me for going to the winter quarters of a gentleman called Swift Runner. He was a pre-Indigenous guide up in Alberta, Canada, in the 1800s. So in 1878, he takes his family to their winter hunting quarters. The tribes spread out to maximize game, and he becomes the Wendigo. He said he's possessed by the Wendigo. Long story short, he ends up killing and eating his entire family of 6 children. His wife and his brother and mother run off somewhere and starved to death, probably. But throughout the winter months, one by one, he's picking off his children and eating them. And to the point he's down to his last son. It's just the two of them. Spring's right around the corner. And, standing there in the spot where he did all this sinister stuff, it hit me standing there. I wasn't prepared for the emotional impact of putting myself in his last kid's shoes, that he knows he's next. He's seen what his father did to his siblings and forced him to eat the siblings, but there's nothing he could do. He was starving. There was nowhere to go, even if he could have the strength to go. And that just hit me right there, standing there, staring at the great woods of the North Woods of Canada. And this isn't hyperbole here, that back in Wisconsin, even now, 3, 4 years, 5 years later, When it gets cold and chilly, I'm still brought back. I'm transported to that Canadian forest, standing there where Swift Runner was when he consumed his entire family, and I just wasn't prepared for that. Like I said, I had been to a lot of crazy places, but nothing hit me like that. I don't know why. To this day, nothing even comes close. And if you're interested in Swift Runner, the entire story is heartbreaking, fascinating, and very gruesome. If you want to look him up.
I think about these stories and I'm open-minded to the existence of things out there because I think there's, more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really easy for us to label someone as a monster, um, because they've done heinous things. And I try to be cautious about that and reluctant with calling someone a monster, even though they may have done heinous things, even though they, are maybe so mentally unwell that it seems like they've lost touch with humanity. They're still humans who have done monstrous things, but maybe not a monster. What is the moment for you where you've thought, okay, humans that have done monstrous things, and yet I think I might be dealing with a monster here, or I'm this the needle is pushing more into the territory of belief, if you will.
Difficult for the Wendigo because, by all accounts, it's too fantastical to exist, to be real. But yet, thousands of people, maybe millions throughout history, and there believed in this, thought it was a real flesh and blood monster that not only could it possess you, it had the spiritual side where shamans could fight it in the spirit realm and the shaking tents, but also that it was flesh and blood and it could be killed. That if your loved one was turning Wendigo, there was up to a point where you could save them, whether you poured hot tallow, which is animal fat, down their throat to defrost their icy heart. A shaman could cure you. Religious leaders could do the same, but up until some point in the ground where you became the monster, then you were transformed into a monster where if they killed you, the body would be there and they'd have to cremate it to get rid of it. So it's a really hard question because, I mean, you hear people talking about Bigfoot doing things that no known animal would do, maybe disappearing or weird lights with it or moving so fast, unlike any other animal. But yet, a lot of people still think, well, it might just be a undiscovered species. Where I don't think that at all with the Wendigo. I don't think one day someone's going to go into the woods and document a clan of Wendigos living up in the Northwoods. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it is a monster in the same way maybe a chupacabra might be considered a monster or a thunderbird. I think it's something wholly different and separate. I don't know if that answers it, but yeah.
Wholly different and separate. So, so then what?
That's and now you see the dilemma that we had and the self-doubt and the idea that, gosh, we'll put this out, but this is like a beginner's guide that I could live to 400 and probably still feel like I don't know much about it. Kevin and I, while we were on all of our trips, we often would just say to, laying down, going to sleep at the Rocky Motel or whatever, or the campsite, and thinking, man, if we were just 200 years earlier, we probably could have caught the more essence of the original legend. Just think of the stories we could have collected if we had been just a couple generations earlier. And that really weighed on us that so much of the Wendigo, outside of other things, has been lost. The legends, the folklore. I mean, many native tribes and communities, they don't even know where it came or the origin, where it came from, because it's so old, it's just always been there. There's not like a point with like Mother Leeds and the Jersey Devil, where it sprang out of the cottage or what be it. So that was very difficult as well. I think the book does a great job of combining everything we know about it. But again, I think we could have done a book, and we debated this, of 500 pages easily, but we said, do we want a book for the four scholars that are going to read that, or for the general public? So we tried to make it as concise as we could.
I mean, you cover so much ground, and there's and I learned a bunch going through it. But one of the things that really it both didn't surprise me, but I was very wide-eyed while I was reading about it, is sort of these Wendigo hunters, and specifically Fiddler, Peddler, the story Jack Fiddler.
Well, Jack Fiddler.
D break some of that story down in the Wendigo hunters, and because yeah, I was just like, nope, didn't know about these guys at all.
Huh. Neither did we when we started out. Yeah, so Jack Fiddler was a Wendigo hunter, and usually it was the chief of the tribe or a powerful shaman within the community that would be um, forced to confront these Wendigos, especially when they were monster form. If they were family form, usually it was a family member that disposed of them because there'd be less likely to be retaliation of someone saying you wrongly accused this person, we killed them. But if it was a family member, it was done out of love and out of not out of anger or spite. But yeah, so Jack Fiddler, by all accounts, he was the son of Porcupine Standing Sideways, another powerful shaman, and he was known throughout the region of Canada. He was in the northeastern part of Ontario with the Sucker Clan, and he was well known as a Wendigo hunter, killer. But he could also cure you of being a Wendigo if you hadn't crossed that imaginary line. But there are accounts he might have killed anywhere from 7 to 40 Wendigos, whether it was the monster form or the human form. But there's a infamous story of a man refusing to get out of his tent because he's becoming the Wendigo, and he's just laying there in agony and yelling, I'm going to get up, I'm going to eat, I'm going to kill all of you. So they call Jack Fiddler over, and he comes over with his whip, and he brings the man out, throws him on the ground, and starts picking him up and throwing him on the ground and whipping him. Now, every time he whips this man, it is said the man screams icicles out of his mouth. And Jack Fiddler's just whipping him, saying, I'm powerful enough to kill you. If you turn into a Wendigo, I will kill you. And by all accounts, the man coughed out some ice and he was cured. That was it. But Jack Fiddler was thought to be a powerful Wendigo killer. But of course, then the Canadian government thought it was murder, that he was killing people that were thought to be going Wendigo. And they saw it as murder. Wendigos don't exist. So they actually captured him, arrested him, brought him back, and Fiddler actually ended up committing suicide out in the forest when he escaped, rather than be held hostage by the Canadian authorities for murder. When everyone in the tribe knew, or the community, the town knew, that if you did not get rid of this, it would infect the entire community, the town, the tribe, everyone would become a Wendigo, and there'd be no one left. And one of the most amazing things we found is that, reading through the archives, that a lot of these people that were turning Wendigo or going Wendigo, saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to eat you, they often begged to be killed before they turned fully, because they didn't want to consume their loved ones. So they would say, you have to kill me before I turn. Do whatever you have to do. And they took some extraordinary lengths to make sure that these people were dead. I mean, way over the top by modern standards.
It's it's a cinematic story. It's also you've got these elements of Van Helsing, as well as, an exorcist, rolled into one. But I was also thinking, like, I love looking at the connective tissue across cultures and how we're dealing with monsters and what we think of monsters, and these people that did not interact with folks in Eastern Europe, and yet very similar types of behavior and lore emerge. What do you make of all that? You personally, with all the research you've done, I know you've also been to Romania, you've covered a lot of ground. Yeah, what do you think? I mean, when you're hearing all of these similarities, because you're a researcher, you have the psychology training and background, and yet you've traveled enough to know it's a weird world out there.
They almost seem innate in our beliefs in them, that here you have stories from all over the world, from cultures that didn't interact with one another. If they did, they didn't speak the same language, have the same religion. And they're remarkably similar stories of these legends, so much so that I think any skeptic out there, and on certain days you could put me in that category, has to look at some of these and say there must be something more to it, because the odds of that occurring are just very slim. That here you have people thousands of miles apart in a time when you weren't traveling 1,000 miles. Today, big deal, you're going cross country. But back then, 30 miles was probably your reign. So I think there's something more to it. What we're picking up on, what that means, I don't know. I don't even know if we have the right questions to ask about it. Maybe it's so advanced that we don't even know if we're asking the right questions. But I find it fascinating, and I will say quickly that the entire rest of the world seems to take these legends and folklore in a more serious tone than we do in the US. That, as you know, when you go to some places and you ask people, they'll say, "What are you doing?" "No, stay away. Don't go looking for that. Crazy American, what are you doing?" And here, Bigfoot's on our beef jerky commercials. So sometimes these legends are more ingrained in other societies for hundreds and hundreds of years before America was even here.
Yeah, it blows my mind. It fascinates me. I love thinking about it, but yeah, it's a little bit creepy. Do you now, Chad, before I let you go, do you have time for a couple more questions, or how are you?
Yeah, great. Let's do
Cool.
it.
And folks, register any of those final questions before we let Chad go. That's in the live stream audience. But we do have one coming in from David and Alicia. Now, you talk in the book about other creatures that have similar attributes to the Wendigo, and we're just talking, cross cultures, these other creatures. Do you think that we would be potentially dealing with the same thing or different subspecies, different creatures altogether that are all getting lumped under the same Wendigo umbrella, etc.?
The Wendigo stories all center around cold, ice, starvation. That's a big part, an important part of the legend, where no one, when people were eating each other's faces in Florida, thought it was the Wendigo. It was bath salts, by the way, but that didn't come up because the Wendigo was specifically the cold, the ice, the north. So I think some of those other creatures that are similar, northern, might be just the same thing, perceived in a different manner, or encountered in a different manner, or believed in differently. So I think a lot of them are probably the same thing, but perceived differently, or maybe several thousands of years of evolution for that subspecies type thing. But I'll often get people asking about warm culture Wendigo, and I just had a Indigenous person at one of my programs last week that was from Mexico, and he said they heard Wendigo stories way down there, but they didn't think they were in that area. But that's how far it traveled. The stories got down to them in the warm cultures. So, but I think it's definitely a northern cold ice for the Wendigo. Are these other things related? Maybe. I guess I'm left with more questions than answers.
Yeah, I try to be cautious with that stuff as far as like, this is more of your Canadian, your northern type of creature, but similar sounds like people are describing similar things, but I don't want to just start throwing around this native term to everything everywhere.
Sure.
Um, do you you mentioned this could be a 500-page book. You could be doing this for another 20 years, but it took you guys a while to put this together, and it does seem like it was a bit of a struggle. Is there a volume two, or are you ready to call it on your Wendigo research?
We were thinking of volume two, but it wouldn't be an expansion of the entire folklore. It would be mostly focused on just the accounts of people going Wendigo or turning Wendigo, the monster. It wouldn't be all the other stuff, the Wendigo psychosis, all of that. Just expanding and adding a few more that we found since that weren't in the original. And that was one of the hardest points, is that we always thought that we should hold off on the book for another reason of being that we felt like there was something just under an archive that we hadn't searched. Like, we're going to put the book out and then we're going to find this treasure trove, or there's something missing. And I've talked to so many researchers and authors who feel the same way, that whatever legend they're working on, they feel like there's probably something out there I'm missing. And for a lot of them, that dissuades them from putting out their work because, and we just came to the conclusion there'll always be something that we discover that wasn't in there. But yeah, we're thinking of doing a second one, but it will be probably a little more condensed, more focused, shining that light right on a narrow field rather than the general lore, because I don't think we'd have enough for an entire new book.
Yeah. And real quickly, we have, I think this is a question coming in from, oh, I know it's coming in from the Midwest, but we know you love the Van Meter monster, but what are some of your other favorite Midwest monsters?
Oh gosh, so many. Pepe, the lake monster of Lake Pepin, which Lake Pepin's on the Mississippi River, dividing Wisconsin and Minnesota, and it's a think of a Loch Ness monster type creature. There's a $50,000 reward attached for it if you can capture it or provide evidence of its existence. You'll claim that reward. Big muddy monster of Southern Illinois, a Bigfoot-like creature with light colored hair or fur, whitish fur from the waist up. From waist down, it's just covered in muck. And so those creatures, I love Thunderbird legends of those in the sky. Yeah, I like shapeshifter stories. We have a lot of deer men and deer women here in the Midwest, of people driving home late at night, seeing what they think is a deer on the side of the road. So they'll slow down not to get roadkill or an accident, and then see the deer transform into a woman or a man and walk across the road and then disappear. And they're left thinking, what the heck's that going on? But sea serpents are one of my favorites. So a ton of sea serpent stories throughout the US that I just love. And then I love the out of place monsters or folklore legends, like in the Badlands of South Dakota, the Badlands National Park, and the Badlands there, they have a really old banshee story. And you're thinking, what the heck's an Irish banshee legend doing in the heart of native Badlands? And so I love those stories that are kind of out of place. They don't seem to belong, but people have experiences with them.
I like those as well because it kind of makes me think if you know if you want to go there, that when people came over from wherever, whatever their country of origin, they brought their stories with them, but maybe they brought their monsters too.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, 100%. And that's why we have so many legends surrounding waters. That's where early non-Indigenous people would settle nearby. So they brought their stories with them. And, outside of, I think a lot of people forget that outside of Indigenous legends, every other legend came with immigrants to this country.
yeah.
All of our families, though, those of us who are non-Indigenous, we're all immigrants, and we brought these stories with us from wherever we came from. And outside of Indigenous stories, we have immigration to thank for all of our U.S. legends and folklore.
Solid point, and I appreciate that point. Finally, I know the chadlewisresearch.com, you keep up to date with your appearances. You got all of your books listed on there, all 38 of them. The But what's next? What can you tease about something that's around the corner, whether it's a book project, an appearance, anything else that you want to put out there?
Yeah, so my most recent book is on supernatural Lake Superior, and this summer I'll be releasing the supernatural Lake Michigan. So I'm kind of tackling the Great Lakes, or at least two of them right now. And I think most people, especially with Superior, if they've never been, they're amazed to find that it's practically an ocean. It's an inland sea. It's so big and gigantic. So I love those stories because you again have sea serpent stories, then you have haunted hotels on the edge of the banks of the and all kinds of singing sand and all these stories. So I love these mysterious, I don't know what John Keel would call window areas or portals where, this little area or even a region where so many bizarre things happen. And I think it showcases that folklore is everywhere. You might have to dig for it a little bit, but if you're quick off side, Aaron, that you've done a lot of TV, and one of the sizzle reels we did was for a show where three of us investigators would basically throw a dart on the wall on a map, and then we'd all have to go to town, and you'd have a certain amount, 6 hours, whatever, or a day or a weekend, and see who could find the best legend of that town from being there. So whether you're like, I'm going to go to the library and dig through the archives, or I'm going to head to the local bar and talk to people, or I'm going to the historical society. The show never got picked up, of course, but I always thought that was fun because you could go into any town in America and find something, some legend. Maybe it's not a monster or a haunting, but it's some legend of a tree that grows, a dollar bill, whatever it is. Yeah.
I love that, and it's yeah, like I have tried to make versions of that show happen that's so local storytelling driven that also connects all of us because we all have stories, and like we said, there's so much overlap with the types of stories, and yet there's just seems like there's lack of interest in expanding it in that way, and being driven by local flavor, but I'm on board with that. I absolutely love that idea, and so I hope it gets made. I hope you are the one that gets it made at some point. But who knows, considering the state of TV and entertainment.
Yeah,
But
true.
and I look forward to the next Great Lakes book because yeah, man, as someone that did not grow up near the Midwest, near the Great Lakes, I don't know how old I was when I finally saw a Great Lake. But yeah, having this moment of realizing this is an inland sea and then peeling back the layers of all the stories, it fascinates me so much to hear about all of these things constantly. I I basically nerded out once I made my way up to Sault Ste. Marie and started getting all those stories and learning about the vast catalog of stories and lore through there. So I love it. So I can't wait. We'll have to have you back on to talk about the next one when that's out. But correct ChadLewisResearch.com, right? That's the way to keep up with you.
If you want to send me a story, ask a question, whatever it is, yep, you find more than you'll ever need or want there.
No, not more than you could want, because I know you got a lot on there, and I still want more. But well, my guest is Chad Lewis. The book is Wendigo Lore. Trying to hold it up. Monsters, Myth, and Madness. Also with Kevin Lee Nelson. And do yourself a favor, pick up this book, and read it at night, even though you may not sleep, because there's some creepy ass stuff in here. Which absolutely, and the artwork is incredible in it as well. You got a lot of great illustrations in there. Um, so, Chad, thank you so much, my friend. We'll have to do this again. I appreciate you being so gracious with your time, and we'll have to talk about more spooky things soon. In the meantime,
Thanks. Keep an
yeah.
eye out.
Thanks. Meantime, this has been Talking Strange. I'm Aaron Sagers. You guys be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.